The Biden administration says it's sanctioning dozens of Israeli settlers that it accuses of carrying out attacks in the occupied West Bank. Patty Culhane reports now from Washington, D.C.
The videos are everywhere. Daily evidence of Palestinians being violently attacked by Israeli settlers, often armed, and in some cases, murdering Palestinians, burning homes, businesses, and cars.
They have weapons and started shooting at us. We were trapped here in the houses with the children.
Before October 7th, the United Nations says violence from settlers had already displaced over 1,100 Palestinians, and that since the beginning of the war, daily settler attacks have more than doubled. Now the U.S. is imposing travel bans on a few dozen of those responsible, possibly including their family members as well. The State Department careful to point out it involves both sides.
As Secretary Blinken made clear to leaders of the government of Israel last week during his visit to the region, they need to do more to stop extremist violence against Palestinians and hold those responsible for it accountable. We will continue to insist that both Israeli and Palestinian leaders take action to interrupt the increasing levels of violence against civilians.
In a state of law, and Israel is a state of law, the right to use violence belongs only to those who are certified to do so by the government. In our case, that's the military, the Israeli police, the Shin Bet, and such.
That will likely ring hollow to the Palestinians in the occupied West Bank, who say Israeli soldiers are often there and do nothing to stop the violence.
He saw the settlers. Some of them had weapons and were shooting. It was fine with him. But if you were standing 200 meters from the settler telling him to go away, the soldier would shoot you. Why is this happening?
Repeated attacks with no consequences, except now one less place to visit for a few dozen Israelis. Patty Culhane, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Well, we can get more on this from our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett, who joins us from Washington, D.C. And Kimberly, tell us, how are these measures going down in the U.S.?
Well, it's certainly being received by the largest Islamic group in the United States, known as CAIR. It's the Council of American Islamic Relations. As a step in the right direction, but certainly not going far enough. And here's why. Because what is well known is that many of these extremist settlers are dual passport holders. In other words, they have Israeli citizenship, but they also hold American passports. And that means that these restrictions are essentially meaningless for at least 15% of them. They're able to come into the United States because they're also U.S. citizens. So in other words, they can continue to act with impunity. And so what the Council on Islamic Relations is saying is that there needs to be something with more teeth, particularly when it comes to American citizens. For example, criminal charges. The other thing that this group is asking for is sanctions against the extremist cabinet members, such as the National Security Minister, Ben-Gvir, the cabinet member that is a known racist who espouses hate against both Palestinian Muslims and Christians, justifying it as being something he says is in the Torah, and essentially has been documented by Amnesty International as conducting and overseeing in the prisons as of October 7th, torture, murder, kidnapping, and other atrocities under his watch. So this is certainly, again, something that in terms of these visa restrictions being viewed as a step in the right direction. But again, this is being viewed as more something that the Biden administration has done to satisfy political pressure, but there needs to be something now that has real teeth in the eyes of many here in the United States of criminal nature through the justice system. And that's what many here are pushing for.
Kimberly, thanks for that. And listening in is Adam Shapiro, who's a director of advocacy for Israel and Palestine at Dawn, a human rights and foreign policy think tank. He joins us live on Skype from Michigan in the United States. And Adam Shapiro, you heard Kimberly there. These measures essentially meaningless. Many of these settlers are dual nationals. with the US passports anyway. Denying them visas doesn't get you very far. How much impact, realistically, is this going to have on the settler communities and settler activity across the occupied West Bank?
I think your correspondent is correct to report that this action is largely meaningless and symbolic. As you point out correctly, those who are dual citizens, and there is certainly a category of those settlers who have committed violent acts against Palestinians, who are American citizens or citizens of other countries, and who won't be impacted by this visa ban. But we should understand this, though, I do think, as an important signal that the administration is taking this issue more seriously. We also do know that behind the scenes, not necessarily publicly announced, that the administration is looking at other avenues of sanctioning through means that it has at its disposal, that it uses towards individuals in other countries for similar types of human rights violations. And so I think we have to understand this also, that this is the beginning of a process that it's incumbent upon people like myself and others who work in the advocacy community to keep pushing on, and to keep pushing this administration to take more meaningful steps and more consequential steps in order to not just issue visa bans, but also to actually have concrete sanctions, including following what weapons are being used, and if these weapons are American-made and supplied weapons, then dealing with that through the mechanisms that Congress has and the administration would also have, as well as potential criminal proceedings.
Going so far as to use the criminal justice system. They are, as we've said, many of them dual nationals, American citizens as well. That could be a measure with real teeth. Is that on the cards?
I think potentially that is definitely on the cards if we can make a strong enough case against an individual with, especially the one with American citizenship. But besides, the judicial sort of criminal process, there's other steps such as asset freezing, which would include bank accounts. There's looking at the larger ecosystem of settler violence, which would include looking at the NGOs that provide charitable, tax-deductible funds to settlements and settlement enterprises. And then at a larger scale, which is tied to the state, because as your reporter noted, there are those in the current Israeli government who are settlers themselves, who are actively engaged in inciting and supporting settler violence. And so looking at, settlement regional councils, which are these bodies governing the settlements and who involve many of these violent individuals, looking at these as criminal organizations, much in the same way as a narco-trafficking group would be looked at as a criminal organization with financial assets, with other types of control and weaponry and using violence to execute, its plans. I think that this is something that's available to the United States, looking at it from this angle, and I think that's where we have to push the government.
But as things stand, you'd agree that this is pretty much a symbolic gesture now, albeit perhaps a message aimed by the Biden administration at the Netanyahu government, which of course contains some senior figures in the settler community, that perhaps more pressure is being prepared, and perhaps they are willing to go further.
I definitely think that they are willing. There is a willingness to go further. I think this is also in part the president's effort to sort of address the dissent brewing internally in the State Department and in other U.S. government administrations, which are unhappy with Biden's policy towards Israel in general, including what's happening in Gaza, but also what's happening in the West Bank. I think at this point, the Biden administration is starting to wake up to understand that small gestures such as this will not have the results that it is hoping for or expecting, that this current Israeli government just is not concerned at all with warnings. They only take notice when there are direct actions. And that now is on the plate for the administration to do.
OK, Adam Shapiro there with the Human Rights and Foreign Policy think tank Dawn. Many thanks for your thoughts.
Thank you.